The world, for Martin, used to have a sound. It was the rhythmic scrape of a chisel against aged oak, the low hum of a table saw, and the sweet, melodic twang of a bass guitar. He was a man built from the ground up, his hands calloused from crafting furniture and nimble from plucking strings. In his late 40s, he carried the quiet confidence of someone who had found his purpose. His small woodworking shop, a sun-drenched space behind his suburban home, was his sanctuary. It smelled of sawdust and linseed oil, and every piece of wood within it held a story, a potential to become something more. Martin saw himself in that wood, strong, grounded, and full of life. His greatest masterpiece, however, was not a chair or a table, but his son, Sam. A bright-eyed boy of 10, Sam was the living, breathing heart of their home. Every evening, Martin would set aside his tools, wipe the dust from his hands, and transform. The carpenter became a father, and the father became a musician. Their nights were a symphony of shared moments. Sam doing his homework at the big oak table Martin built, while Martin, in the corner of the living room, would softly play his bass. The music wasn't for a crowd. It was for Sam. It was the soundtrack to their life. He'd watch his son from across the room, a gentle, proud smile on his face, lost in the rhythm and the simple beauty of it all. This was his dream, his aspiration, to watch Sam grow, to guide him, to be his rock and his anchor. Their home, before the quiet descended, was a fortress of warmth. Laughter echoed in the hallways, the aroma of a home-cooked meal filled the air, and the gentle chaos of a healthy, happy family prevailed. Martin's life was a perfect chord, a simple yet powerful harmony of work, family, and passion. He was an ordinary man, living an extraordinary life. Extraordinary because it was his, and it was full of love. His friends would often joke that he was the luckiest man they knew, a man who had everything he ever wanted, all wrapped up in a suburban dream. But there's a secret about the past. We only truly appreciate its light when we're standing in the darkness of the present. And for Martin, that darkness was coming. That perfect chord was about to be struck by a discordant note that would shatter everything. You know, some stories are so powerful, so moving, they change the way we see the world. If you're connecting with this story, if it's stirring something inside of you, I invite you to become part of our community. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. It helps us continue to share these profound human experiences. Now back to Martin's story. The music is about to stop. The bass sat on its stand, a silent sentinel in the corner. Martin had just finished practicing a new song for his band, his fingers still tingling from the vibrations. Sam ran in from the backyard, his cheeks flushed from play, and threw his arms around his father's waist. "That was awesome, Dad. Can you teach me that one?" Martin's heart swelled. "One day, kiddo, one day." He looked at the boy, his entire future laid out in front of him, bright and full of promise. He had no idea how fragile that promise was. He had no idea that a silent goodbye was already on its way, carried not on the wind, but in the very cells of his son's body. The world was about to change. The noise of a full life would soon be replaced by a profound, terrible silence. The first crack in their perfect world wasn't a sudden crash, but a whisper. It was in the way Sam would stumble slightly, catching himself on the doorframe, or the way his handwriting, once so neat, became a shaky scrawl. Martin, a man who saw potential and solutions everywhere, dismissed it at first. "Growing pains," he'd tell himself. "Boys are clumsy." But the whispers grew louder, more insistent. A dropped glass, a forgotten word, the vacant look in Sam's eyes that would last for a fleeting moment too long. The bass guitar, once a nightly ritual, began to collect a fine layer of dust. The workshop became a place he only visited to stare at the unfinished projects. The scent of sawdust, now a painful reminder of a life that was slipping away. The day of the diagnosis wasn't a single moment. It was a slow, agonizing slide into a new reality. The doctor's office was sterile, the air thick with the unspoken. Martin held Sam's hand, the small, warm fingers a desperate anchor in. A sea of medical terms he didn't want to understand. The words, progressive neurological disease, no cure, hit him with the force of a physical blow. The world went silent, all the vibrant sounds of his old life replaced by the high-pitched ringing in his ears. He was a carpenter who built things to last, a musician who found harmony, but here, in this cold room, he was told that his son was falling apart, and there was nothing he could do to fix it. His hands, his strong, capable hands, were now useless. The transformation of their home mirrored the transformation of their lives. The welcoming living room became an intensive care unit. The couch was replaced by a hospital bed, the sound of Martin's bass by the insistent beep of a ventilator. The vibrant colors of childhood were washed away by the sterile whites of medical equipment. The house, once filled with laughter, was now a tomb of forced quiet, a place where life was not lived, but endured. Martin moved through it like a ghost in his own home, his movements precise and practiced, checking vitals, adjusting tubes, administering medication. He was no longer a father playing music for his son. He was a caregiver, an unsleeping guardian of a fading light. The first few weeks were a haze of denial and grief. Martin refused help, convinced he could shoulder the burden alone. He pushed away his friends, his bandmates, anyone who reminded him of the man he used to be. Every question, every offer of help felt like an accusation, a suggestion that he wasn't strong enough. He was, after all, Sam's father. His duty was to protect him, to hold him together. But Sam was becoming a stranger in his own body. He could no longer speak, his bright eyes now the only window into his soul. And Martin, who had once talked for hours with his son, was left to communicate through the silent language of touch, of a gentle hand on a forehead, of a whispered, "I love you," into a quiet room. The emotional toll was immense. He'd spend hours staring at Sam, waiting for a sign, any sign, that the boy he knew was still there. The love was still there, a burning, fierce furnace in his chest, but it was now tangled with a growing, insidious feeling of anger and frustration. He was angry at the disease, at the unfairness of it all, but beneath the anger, a darker emotion began to take hold. Guilt. Guilt for his moments of exhaustion, for the fleeting thought of wishing for it all to be over. He was supposed to be his son's strength. Yet he felt himself cracking, splintering into a million pieces. The man who had been a rock was now sand, and with every passing day he felt more and more of himself being washed away by the tide of grief and despair. The void wasn't just in the house, it was in him, a gaping chasm where his old life used to be. The days bled into weeks, and the weeks into a monotonous grey expanse. Martin's life became a series of silent rituals. His mornings were marked not by the sun, but by the buzzing of an alarm clock at 4 a.m. He'd stumble out of bed, a ghost in his own home, to check Sam's vitals, adjust the ventilator and administer the morning's dose of medication. His hands, once so purposeful and strong, now trembled slightly as he handled the delicate tubes and syringes. They were no longer the hands of a craftsman or a musician. They were the hands of a nurse, a role he hadn't chosen but had been forced to take on. The workshop gathered dust, a mausoleum of what used to be. The bass guitar stood in its corner, a silent testament to a life that no longer existed. His greatest struggle was not with the physical demands, but with the profound loneliness. Friends called less and less. The initial flood of condolences and offers of help had slowed to a trickle, then stopped. He understood. Their lives moved on. They went to work, took their kids to soccer practice, and worried about traffic jams. Small, normal things that felt like a universe away from his reality. The phone would ring, and he would stare at it, a knot of dread in his stomach. How could he explain what his life had become? How could he tell them about the moments he'd spent staring at the ceiling, wondering if he was strong enough to keep going? So he stopped answering. The silence of the house became his only companion, broken only by the sterile hum of machines. The exhaustion was a constant heavy blanket. He learned to exist on a few hours of fragmented sleep, each rest interrupted by the insistent beeping of a machine or a low moan from Sam. His reflection in the bathroom mirror was a stranger. Deep, purple shadows clung to his eyes. His posture was permanently stooped, and his once robust frame was now gaunt and hollow. He'd look at his hands, seeing the ghost of calluses from his woodworking, and a wave of grief would wash over him. He was losing not only his son, but himself. Every day brought a fresh battle against despair. He'd find himself standing in the kitchen, staring into the middle distance, lost in a fog of apathy. Food became an afterthought. He'd eat standing up, a half-eaten sandwich in his hand, his mind a million miles away, replaying old memories of Sam, the boys' first bike ride, the time they built a birdhouse together, the sound of his laughter. Those memories, once a source of comfort, were now a torment, a cruel reminder of what had been lost. In his darkest moments, a forbidden thought would creep into his mind, a whisper he would violently shove away. How much longer can I do this? It was a question that filled him with a suffocating, unbearable guilt. How could he, a father, wish for an end to his own son's suffering if it meant the end of his son's life? He couldn't. So he bottled up the thought, adding it to the growing pile of unspoken emotions that were slowly suffocating him. The only breaks in this routine came in the form of Dr. Anya Sharma, a compassionate nurse who would visit every other day. Unlike the others, she didn't offer empty platitudes or pity. She saw him not just as a caregiver, but as a person who was suffering. She talked to him about the mundane details of the outside world, the weather, a new book she was reading, anything to pull him out of the oppressive silence of his home. Her presence was a small, flickering candle in his darkness. But even with her, Martin struggled to be honest. "I'm fine," he'd say, a practiced lie that felt heavier with each repetition. He couldn't admit to anyone, not even to her, the true depth of his weariness, the secret guilt he carried. He was trapped in a cage of his own making, a prison built of love and duty. Every day was a reenactment of the same play, a tragedy with no end in sight. He was a man who knew how to build, how to fix, how to create harmony. But here, in the face of this relentless disease, he was powerless. The silence of the house, the sterile beep of the machines, the slow, agonizing disappearance of his son, it all served as a constant, brutal reminder that sometimes the greatest act of love is also the most painful. He was fighting a war on two fronts, one against the disease that was stealing his son, and another, far more insidious war against his own mind. It was a Tuesday, his own guilt, just past 2 a.m., and his own breaking heart. The house was bathed in the cold blue light of the medical machines. A high-pitched alarm, louder and more insistent than usual, tore through the silence. Martin, who had been dozing in a chair by Sam's bed, shot up, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. Sam was in distress. His small body was racked by tremors, his breathing shallow and strained. A look of profound fear and pain, one that Martin hadn't seen in months, flashed across his son's face. It was a clear, unmistakable cry for help. Martin moved quickly, his training kicking in. He checked the monitors, adjusted the oxygen flow, and did everything the doctors had taught him. But the fear in Sam's eyes didn't subside. He was in agony, and there was nothing Martin could do to stop it. As he held Sam's trembling hand, whispering reassurances, a different kind of silence fell over him. It wasn't the silence of his lonely house. It was the silence of a profound truth. He looked at his son, truly looked at him, and saw not just the boy he was desperately trying to save, but the man he was holding captive with his love. He saw the suffering, the unyielding pain, and the sheer exhaustion of a young soul trapped in a failing body. In that agonizing moment, holding his son's hand, a thought once banished as a dark secret now surfaced with a terrifying clarity. He didn't want to save Sam anymore. Not in this way. His love for his son was so immense, so all-encompassing, that the only thing he wanted was for the pain to stop. He wanted his son to be at peace, to be free. And in that terrifying, heartbreaking realization, something shifted. The immense, suffocating weight of guilt that had been crushing him for months began to lift. He wasn't a bad father for wanting this. He was a father who loved his son more than life itself. He was willing to endure the pain of losing him, just so that Sam would not have to endure another moment of suffering. This wasn't a betrayal of his love. It was the ultimate, purest expression of it. He leaned in close, his voice thick with a lifetime of love and a moment of gut-wrenching grief. "It's okay, my son," he whispered, his tears falling silently onto Sam's cheek. "You can rest. Dad's going to be okay." He said it not just for Sam, but for himself, for the part of him that was clinging to a hope that was, in itself, a form of torment. He forgave himself in that moment. He forgave himself for the exhaustion, for the resentment, for the forbidden desire for an end to this long, slow goodbye. He let go of the fight, and in doing so he set both of them free. The tension in Sam's hand lessened. His breathing, still labored, seemed to find a rhythm. The terror in his eyes faded, replaced by a deep, weary peace. This is the moment that defines us, when we're faced with a choice between what we think we're supposed to do and what our heart tells us is right. It's a testament to the strength of the human spirit. If you're finding strength in Martin's story, please consider supporting our work by subscribing to the channel. Your support allows us to continue bringing these powerful and inspiring stories of resilience and hope to light. Now, let's see what comes next for Martin. As the sun began to rise, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink, a strange and terrible quiet settled over the house. Sam's breathing, which had been a constant labored presence, now ceased. The high-pitched alarms fell silent, replaced by the flat, empty line of the monitor. Sam was gone. Martin didn't panic, he didn't cry out, he simply sat there, holding his son's hand, a single tear tracing a path down his cheek. The pain was immense, a raw and agonizing wound, but beneath it was a profound sense of relief. He had said his goodbye, not in words, but in the truest language of love. He had given his son permission to find peace, and in doing so, he had found his own. The silent struggle was over. A new, equally difficult journey of grief was just beginning, but for the first time in a very long time, it was a journey he would take without the crushing weight of guilt. The days that followed Sam's passing were a quiet, profound grief. The house was now truly silent, its emptiness overwhelming. The absence of the machine's hum was a physical sensation, a missing piece of the air that Martin breathed. He spent his days in a fog of sorrow, but a new feeling, a fragile peace, was growing alongside the pain. The guilt was gone. He was no longer a prisoner of his love, but a man who had made the most difficult and compassionate choice of his life. He was grieving, yes, but he was also free. His first step toward a new future was to dismantle the hospital room. He carefully packed away the machines, the tubes, the medicines. Each item was a memory, a chapter in a book he was finally ready to close. He didn't rush. He cleaned the room, wiping away the sterile scent of antiseptic and replacing it with the fresh smell of a new beginning. He opened the windows, letting the sunlight flood into the space that had been dark for so long. The house, once a fortress of quiet suffering, was slowly becoming a home again. He rearranged the furniture, a silent act of rebuilding, and placed a small, framed photo of Sam on the fireplace mantel, a photo of his son, smiling, full of life. It was a tribute, not a shrine. He knew he couldn't go back to the man he was, but he could build something new from the fragments. He walked into his old workshop, the place he had abandoned, and the scent of sawdust was a welcome shock to his senses. He ran his hands over the woodworking tools, feeling the familiar weight and texture. He didn't pick them up immediately. Instead, he simply sat there, absorbing the atmosphere. A few days later, he was back at the workbench, not to finish an old project, but to start a new one. He began building a small, ornate wooden box. It was a difficult, painstaking process, but with each cut, each rasp of sandpaper, he was putting a piece of himself back together. It wasn't a return to the past. It was an act of creation, a tribute to the memory of his son, and a promise to his own future. He reached out to Dr. Anya Sharma, the compassionate nurse who had been his only anchor. They met for coffee, and for the first time, Martin truly talked. He shared his journey, the guilt, the despair, and the final liberating act of love. She listened with quiet understanding, her empathy a warm balm on his still raw wounds. Their friendship, forged in the crucible of his darkest moments, was now a source of strength and hope. He also reconnected with his bandmates, not to play the bass just yet, but to simply share a beer and a conversation. They were there for him, not as a reminder of what he had lost, but as a sign that the world, though changed, was still waiting for him. Martin's eyes still held the deep sadness of loss, but now a new light shone within them, a light of serenity and purpose. He had not triumphed over grief, but he had transcended it. He understood that love is not about holding on, but about knowing when to let go. His journey taught him that true strength is found not in a relentless battle, but in the courage to accept a painful truth. He was a new man, not defined by his tragedy, but by the love and grace with which he navigated it. His triumph was not in saving his son, but in freeing himself from a love that had become a prison, allowing both of them to find peace. Martin's story is a powerful reminder that the greatest act of love can sometimes be the most difficult. It teaches us that compassion for others and for ourselves is the key to true liberation. If you or someone you know is a caregiver, remember that your feelings are valid. You are not alone, and it's okay to seek help and forgiveness. Please share this story with someone who might need to hear it, and join our community by liking and subscribing. Your support helps us share these vital stories of human courage and compassion.